I never imagined I'd one day be telling this story. Talking about it is like opening a scar that still aches, but it's also my way of telling other women mothers like me that they are not alone, that the pain of being challenged in the most sacred role there is may try to knock us down, but it will never erase us. Have you ever felt like someone was trying to rip away your right to be a mother? That's the pain I lived through. And if you too believe that no mother should ever be erased from her child's life, subscribe to the channel, because here we share real stories of struggle, resilience, and a love that never gives up. Always dreamed of being a mother. Since I was a girl, I carried that deep desire to care for someone, to cradle a little body in my arms and feel life take on meaning with every tiny breath. When my daughter was born, it felt as if the whole universe had rearranged itself for me alone. I still remember the first time I held her, so small, so fragile, but with eyes that already looked at me as if to say, "You are my whole world." In that moment I realized there was no longer an I, there was only we. Those first years of motherhood were a mix of exhaustion, learning, and a happiness that's almost impossible to put into words. There were nights I barely slept, but the instant I felt her little hands search for mine, every struggle turned into strength. I was the wall, the fortress that would protect that child from any injustice, from any betrayal the world could throw at her. But like many real-life stories, mine didn't stay in a fairy tale. Her father and I had a marriage that began beautifully, full of promises. He was charming, funny, full of dreams, but over time his dreams stopped, including mine. While I lived for our daughter, he kept finding reasons to be farther and farther away. The fights multiplied, the silence became unbearable, and one day I realized we were only sharing a roof, we no longer shared a heart. Divorce became inevitable. I remember like it was yesterday, the first time I had to hand my daughter over to him for a weekend. It felt like someone was tearing a piece of me away. I smiled at her and said it was just see you later, but inside my heart was screaming. She left with her pink backpack on, completely unaware that from that moment on, my spot by her side wouldn't be guaranteed at every moment. That was the start of a long battle I didn't yet know I'd have to fight. In the first months after the divorce, there was still a certain balance. I had my days with her, he had his. I worked hard to make the transition as smooth as possible because I knew my daughter hadn't done anything wrong. She was the innocence caught between two broken lives. But life sometimes throws curves you can't see until you trip over them. It was on one of those curves that I heard her name for the first time, the woman who would become my daughter's stepmother. At first, I admit, I tried not to feel anything. He has a right to rebuild his life, I kept telling myself. I wanted to move on too, even if my heart was still in pieces. There was one thing that worried me though. How would my daughter react? When she came back from her dad's house after one of those early visits, she said casually, "Mom, did you know Daddy's girlfriend paints her nails blue like mine?" I smiled, swallowed hard, and answered, "That's nice, sweetie," but inside a sharp ache crossed my chest. This wasn't about nail polish. It was about territory, about another woman occupying spaces of affection that had, until then, belonged only to me. Little by little I realized this new presence wasn't just my ex's companion. She reached out to my daughter with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. In the early meetings she seemed polite with me, smiling, saying pleasant things, but I sensed something different in her eyes. It was as if she were saying, without words, "I matter too. I have a place here." And I, already battling the pain of divorce, felt a new fear sprout, the fear of being replaced. At first I tried to convince myself it was just my own insecurity. After all, wouldn't it be better for my daughter if everyone got along? Wouldn't it be good for her to have more people looking out for her? I told myself that so many times I almost believed it. Then the masks began to slip. Small gestures, tiny barbs disguised as casual remarks. A comment here, a suggestion there. I noticed them but didn't want to accept what they meant. It was like being in a silent battle where the main weapon was manipulation. And at the center of it all was my daughter, my reason for living. Looking back, I can see that this was only the first chapter of a long war. A war I didn't choose, but one that was forced upon me. From that moment on, my life shifted from simply being a mother to being someone who would have to resist injustice, resist humiliation, resist the fear of being erased from my own daughter's life. I didn't know it then, but I was about to face the hardest battle of my life. Signing those papers felt like tearing up a book I'd dreamed of writing to the very last page. I remember the pen shaking in my hand, as if my body were trying to resist the inevitable. The courthouse silence only made the moment heavier. Indifferent glances from clerks, papers passed hand to hand, stamps striking like hammer blows against my heart. In that instant, I realized I wasn't just saying goodbye to a failed marriage. I was, in a way, losing the life I'd imagined for my daughter, a home with both parents, the safety of an intact nest. I looked at her so small, so innocent, and felt I'd failed to shield her from the storm. In the days that followed, emptiness took over the house. The space that had once been filled even when it was with painful arguments now echoed with a suffocating silence. The bed felt too big, the furniture stared at me like witnesses to the end, but nothing hurt more than my daughter's pink suitcase leaning by the door, ready for visits to her dad's. The first time I watched her pull that suitcase, her little hands trying to hold the handle, it felt like my heart had been ripped out. I smiled, crouched down, smoothed her hair and said, "It'll be fun, sweetheart. Mommy loves you." She smiled back, trusting, unaware of the battle raging inside me. When the door closed, I collapsed. I cried until I lost my voice. Alone there, the feeling was one of injustice, of humiliation. How could it be that I, who had given every second of my life to be the best mother I could, now had to share my daughter with someone who had already given up on the family? The days she was with me were light laughter, hugs, routine. We made pancakes for breakfast, painted our nails in different colors, rewatched the same movies she loved. I tried to pack every minute she was with me so that my love might outlast any distance, but the days she was gone were torture. The house felt dead, and I kept asking myself, will she miss me? Does her dad speak ill of me? Will she still see me as the most important person in her life? It was in that whirl of doubts that the word stepmother began to creep into my mind, even before I'd met her. The idea alone suffocated me. Who would she be? What place would she try to take? What made it worse was my ex's coldness. He seemed pleased to see me suffer. He made a point of showing he was moving on, that his life was taking on new shape. I, on the other hand, was still picking up the pieces of my heart. Once, during a custody exchange, he said to me in a flat tone, "You need to get used to it. Things have changed." It stabbed me. As if I didn't already know things had changed. I was living that change every day in my skin, in my soul. But to him, it was just a sentence, a warning. To me, it was confirmation of my greatest fear, that life was pushing me out of the center of my daughter's world. Those first weeks after the divorce were a cruel test of endurance. Some days I felt wrecked. Other days, hearing my daughter's laughter gave me a spark of strength. It was as if she were saying without knowing, "Mom, keep going. I need you." That tension kept me going. Pain and hope walked side by side. What I didn't know then, and what would soon be impossible to ignore, was that the real challenge was yet to come. I was adjusting to the idea of sharing custody with her father, but I wasn't prepared to share my role as her mother with another woman. I'd always heard time heals everything, but in that phase, time only seemed to deepen my fear. Each visit, every return, every little story my daughter brought back from her dad's house felt like a warning. Her presence is growing, and I, powerless, felt as if each word was another attempt to erase me bit by bit from my own daughter's life. A mother's heart is like a radar. It picks up signals long before any logical explanation appears. That's exactly what happened to me. One Sunday afternoon, my daughter came back from her dad's house, excited to tell me about her weekend. I sat down beside her, ready to listen to her stories, when suddenly I noticed something different. It wasn't just what she was saying, but how she was saying it. The phrases, the expressions, they weren't hers, they weren't mine. "Mommy, you can't talk to me like that, or I'll get sad and it's better if I stay at Daddy's." That sentence struck me like lightning. I had never spoken harshly to her. I had always been the mother who explained, who hugged, who comforted. But those words, they didn't come from my daughter's mouth. They were echoes of someone else. In that moment, I felt the first distance, small, almost invisible, but painful like a splinter buried deep. In the days that followed, other signs appeared. My daughter began questioning rules she had once accepted naturally. Simple things, like bedtime or eating her vegetables, suddenly turned into battles. "At Daddy's house, it doesn't have to be this way. The other person lets me play more." The other person. She didn't say the name yet, but I knew who she meant. And every time that comparison came up, I felt the injustice burn in my chest. I was the mother who stayed awake through long nights, who cared for her fevers, who knew every detail of her fears and dreams, and yet, I was already being questioned. It didn't take long before the stepmother's digs began slipping into conversations, disguised by my daughter's innocence. Daddy's girlfriend says I need to eat better, or else I'll end up like you, tired and with no energy. Those words, spoken with a child's natural simplicity, cut through me like knives. I didn't know whether to cry from pain or from anger. It wasn't about discipline, it was a veiled insult, an attempt to belittle me in front of my own daughter. The feeling was humiliation, betrayal. How could someone who had never lived through my sleepless nights dare to paint me as a bad example? I also started noticing a physical distance. Before, my daughter would run into my arms every time she came home. She would hug me tight, as if to make up for every second we'd been apart. Now, the hug still came, but it was quick, rushed, as though she were eager to be done. I smiled, pretended not to notice, but when the door closed and she was distracted with her toys, I would lock myself in the bathroom and cry in silence. It felt like I was losing ground, inch by inch, and the worst part was the helplessness. I couldn't control what happened in her father's house. I couldn't stop the words, the comparisons, the gestures that undermined my authority. All I could do was fight to make sure the love between us was stronger than any manipulation. That was when I realized how manipulation really works. It doesn't strike all at once. It seeps in like a slow, invisible poison, slipping through cracks until it contaminates everything. And I was watching, day after day, as that poison dripped into the most precious bond of my life. Sometimes I wondered if I was overreacting, if it was just paranoia, born of the wounds from the divorce. But all it took was one look into my daughter's eyes, seeing doubt flicker there, to know it wasn't my imagination. It was real. Injustice began to mix with revolt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront my ex, to look that woman in the eye and say, "You will never take my place." But I knew I couldn't act that way, not in front of my daughter. I had to be the fortress, even when I felt shattered inside. So I kept the tears for when I was alone, and I made myself a promise: I would not let them erase me. Even if the whole world tried to push me aside, I would resist, because no one, absolutely no one, could ever strip me of the title I earned with blood, sweat, and love: being a mother. I'll never forget the day I saw her for the first time. It was a sunny Saturday, the kind of day when the world seems to want to smile, but inside me there was only anxiety. I had arranged with my ex-husband to pick up my daughter a little earlier. I parked in front of his house, took a deep breath, and rang the bell. When the gate opened, there she was, hair perfectly styled, a light dress that looked hand-picked for the occasion, and a smile so flawless it felt fake. The woman my ex now presented to the world as his partner. The woman who, from that moment on, would be part of my daughter's daily life. "Hi, you must be Anne's mother," she said, reaching out her hand. Those words cut through me like a knife. You must be the mother. As if there were any room for doubt. As if it needed confirmation who I was. I smiled politely, shook her hand, and answered, "Yes, I am her mother." I emphasized the word mother. I needed her to understand, from the very beginning, the one role she could never claim. My daughter came running, happy as always. But this time, before throwing her arms around me, she looked up at her stepmother as if asking permission. And the stepmother, with that calculated smile, simply nodded. That destroyed me inside. The gesture seemed small, almost invisible. But to me, it was like hearing a sentence. She was already seeping into my daughter's heart. During the short conversation we had that day, I noticed how skilled this woman was at hiding her intentions. She spoke gently, used sweet words, but every phrase carried a subtle insinuation. She loves playing with me in the yard. She has such amazing energy. I always say it's important to keep her on a healthy routine. You know. She told me she gets anxious sometimes, but here we talk about it a lot. Each comment sounded like a reminder. See how attentive I am. See how much I care. See how I could be better. My blood boiled, but I held it in. I knew that if I reacted, I'd look like the jealous mother, the bitter ex. So I swallowed the lump in my throat, took my daughter home, and tried to hide the tears threatening to fall. That night, as my daughter slept beside me, I stayed awake for hours, just watching her calm breathing. And deep in my heart, a fear I had never felt before began to grow. The fear of being replaced. Until then, I had feared distance. I had feared her father's words, building barriers between us. But now, for the first time, I could see before me a woman who seemed willing to step into a place that was never hers. As the weeks went by, her presence grew stronger. My daughter came back from visits with stories. We baked a cake together. She helped me with my homework. She said I have a smile just like hers. And each story hurt more than the last. It felt like a shadow was stretching over our bond, covering the light that had always illuminated our connection as mother and daughter. But at the same time, there was a fire inside me. I would not let this happen. No matter how much they tried to push me aside, I would resist. Back then, I didn't fully understand how cruel that woman could be. I thought maybe the problem was only my jealousy, my insecurity, something I could overcome. But with time, I realized the war was only beginning. She didn't just want to be a good partner to my ex. She wanted something much bigger, something unacceptable. She wanted to erase me from my daughter's life. If there's one thing I've learned on this journey, it's that some people are experts at wearing masks. My daughter's stepmother was one of them. To the world, to my ex-husband, to the neighbors, she was sweet, understanding, devoted. But to me, I saw something beyond the polished smile. It was as if, behind every soft word, there was a hidden blade. The first digs were so subtle they could almost go unnoticed. We were at the school gate, she and I, waiting for my daughter to come out. Up until then, I had kept a cordial posture. After all, what could I do? Start an argument in front of everyone? Become the target of disapproving stares? No. I swallowed hard and smiled, even when all I wanted was to scream. That day, she said, in an innocent tone, "Did you know Anne's been having a little trouble with math homework? But don't worry, I've been helping her a lot. She learns quickly with me." The way she said it hit me hard. It wasn't just about math. It was as if she were saying, "Look, I'm more capable. I'm the solution where you fail." I smiled, answered politely, "Yes, I keep up with it closely too. But thank you for helping." Inside, my soul burned. I knew this wasn't about helping. It was about competing for space. Other times, the insinuations came in the form of comparisons, always in front of my daughter. "She loves eating salad here." It's amazing how kids adapt when they have an example, isn't it? Or, "I usually let her pick out her clothes by herself. I think it's important to give her freedom." Little comments, tossed off casually, but always carrying the same underlying message, that I was rigid, outdated, insufficient. My daughter, innocent as she was, absorbed it as truth. I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, as if she was starting to wonder, is my mom really doing it right? That look was what hurt the most. Not the words, not the fake smiles, but the reflection they created in the relationship I treasured above all else. What revolted me most was the hypocrisy. In front of my ex, she played the angel, the ideal stepmother, always willing to cooperate, always so concerned about the child's well-being. But when it was just the two of us, there was something else in her eyes, a spark of rivalry, a glint of challenge. It was as if she were saying, "Let's see how much you can take. Let's see who truly wins her heart." And I, silently, kept asking myself, why? Why would anyone choose to turn a child's life into a battleground? The days grew heavier. I couldn't relax when my daughter went to her father's house. It wasn't just the fear of distance anymore. It was the constant dread that new seeds were being planted against me. I felt like I was under judgment all the time, as if there was a quiet campaign to discredit me. It was unfair. Injustice. That word echoed in my mind. I, who had given my entire life to my daughter's happiness, was now forced to prove my worth at every turn. And the one putting me in this invisible courtroom was someone who had never lived through a single one of the battles that had made me a mother. Sometimes I tried to rationalize. I told myself, maybe it's just my insecurity. Maybe she really just wants to help. But all it took was another poisonous comment, another spiteful comparison, to remind me it wasn't my imagination. It was real. And little by little, I began to see that this woman didn't just want to be part of my daughter's life. She wanted to be the lead role. That's when I realized the masks wouldn't last forever. And at some point, the silent competition would turn into something harsher. The game of appearances would soon give way to something more cruel, more direct, more painful. I just didn't know I was about to feel the first sting pierce my skin openly and humiliatingly. There are words that may sound simple, but when spoken in front of a child, they carry the power to tear a mother's soul apart. The first open, cruel barb came on a seemingly ordinary day, but one I've never been able to forget. My daughter had just come out of school. I was there to pick her up, as always, with a ready smile and open arms. To my surprise, My ex-husband showed up too, accompanied, of course, by the stepmother. Until then, our interactions had been superficial, full of fake smiles and polite phrases, but that day, for the first time, her mask slipped right in front of my daughter's eyes. As we spoke briefly about the week's schedule, she threw the first stone. "Oh, Anne's been so tired lately. I guess the routine at your house must be pretty heavy, huh?" My daughter, innocent, looked at me silently, as if searching for confirmation. And I, frozen, swallowed down the revolt rising inside me. It was a simple sentence, but loaded with poison. In front of my daughter, she was insinuating that I didn't take good care of her, that my home was a burden, that maybe I wasn't capable of giving her the best. I forced a smile and replied, "Actually, our routine is calm. She has set schedules, goes to bed early, eats well." But inside, I was screaming, "How dare you?" In the days that followed, more barbs came, always disguised as concern or advice. Yesterday she wanted to do her homework with me because she said sometimes you don't have time at home. She loves when we talk about feelings. It's so important for a child to have someone who truly listens. Each phrase was like a needle jabbed in front of my daughter, slowly corroding the image she had of me. And the pain wasn't just in the words, it was in my daughter's eyes. As she began absorbing them, I saw her shrink, confused, torn between the mother who had always been there and this new figure presenting herself as a savior. The worst moment happened at a birthday party. There were several other moms around, and the stepmother, always keen on having an audience, seized the chance. While I was fixing my daughter's hair, she commented loudly, "She's getting more and more into taking care of herself, isn't she? Funny, I'd never noticed that before. Must be because now she has someone who likes to get ready with her." The other moms laughed politely. My face burned. It was public humiliation, a clear message. She only has this because I'm here. My daughter stayed quiet, but I noticed her eyes drift down to the floor. That moment etched something inside her and inside me too. That night, when we got home, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried like a child. I felt rage, indignation, and at the same time, a deep exhaustion. Why did I have to prove at every moment that I was enough? Why did someone who didn't even know our story get the right to plant doubts between me and my daughter? I knew then it wasn't just about comments. It was a strategist, silent, calculated. First the barbs, then the comparisons, until little by little my place would be eroded. And it was there, in the middle of my pain, that a new promise was born. I would not give in. They could humiliate me, discredit me, try to erase me, but as long as I breathed, I would fight for my daughter's love. If there is a greater pain than hearing insults from someone trying to steal your place, it's hearing those same words repeated from the innocent mouth of your own child. And that's exactly what began to happen. My daughter, who had always run into my arms with absolute trust, started saying things that didn't sound like they came from her, adult words in a child's mouth, words far too sharp to have been born from her pure heart. The first time was during a simple dinner at home. I had made her favorite meal, rice, beans, grilled chicken, and tomato salad. She looked at her plate, wrinkled her nose, and said, "At Daddy's house, I eat much healthier food. Sarah says fried food is bad and that you should learn to cook better." My hand trembled on the fork. For a few seconds, I had no reaction. I took a deep breath and answered calmly, "Sweetheart, every home has its way. I cook with a lot of love for you, and that's important too." She just shrugged, not realizing the pain tearing through me. Another day, when I set rules for phone use, I heard something even worse. "You're too controlling, Mom," Sarah said. "I need freedom to learn on my own." Controlling? That word had never been part of my daughter's vocabulary. It was like an echo of her voice, the woman trying to compete with me for the love I had sown. I felt wronged, belittled. I, who sacrificed every day to give healthy limits, was now being painted as oppressive. These little phrases kept multiplying, each one a new wound. She said, "You're too nervous." She thinks I should spend more time there, because here you're always tired. She told me you need to take better care of yourself, or you could get sick. Each comment crushed me, not because of the words themselves, but because of the damage they did to my bond with my daughter. It was as if, little by little, someone was rewriting my story right before her eyes. I remember one night in particular. My daughter was lying beside me, almost asleep. Suddenly, she murmured, "Mommy, why aren't you like her?" My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I stayed silent for a few seconds, swallowing my tears, and then I answered, Because I'm me, sweetheart, and I love you in my way our way. She closed her eyes and drifted into peaceful sleep, but I stayed awake the whole night, with that question echoing inside me. That's when I realized the true cruelty of the situation. The stepmother didn't need to confront me directly. All she had to do was plant seeds, drop little phrases, comparisons, and it was my daughter's innocence that watered those seeds, and I, unwillingly, became the soil where they took root. The injustice gnawed at me. I felt like I wasn't losing my daughter to a court ruling, or to physical distance, but to emotional manipulation, and that hurt infinitely more. But at the same time, revolt began to rise in me. I couldn't keep pretending it was just in my head. I couldn't stay silent in the face of the evidence. Something inside me screamed it was time to fight, but I still didn't know how. Manipulation, that's a word I only truly came to understand when I saw it used against me, day after day. In the most sensitive area of my life, my relationship with my daughter, I had already felt the barbs, already noticed the subtle comparisons, but when the patterns began to repeat, I realized none of this was accidental. It was a strategy. The stepmother never attacked directly. She didn't raise her voice or say anything openly offensive. On the contrary, her weapon was the disguise of concern, the mask of kindness. Behind the sweet smile hid calculated blows, aimed at the very place where it would hurt most. She didn't just want to live alongside my daughter. She wanted my daughter to believe I wasn't enough. The situations multiplied. At a family birthday party, for example, my daughter asked for a piece of cake before dinner. I, firm but loving, said, "After dinner, sweetheart, not now." Immediately, the stepmother jumped in. "Poor thing, sometimes a little piece doesn't hurt, right? Kids need to enjoy themselves." My daughter looked at me, torn. I saw the doubt planted in her eyes. I, the mother, became the strict one, the controlling one. She, the stepmother, was the generous, fun one. That's how she carved out space, by turning my no's into cruelty, and her yeses into kindness. Another time, my daughter came down with a cold, nothing serious, but I stayed up night and day caring for her, making tea, giving medicine, holding her in my arms. The following weekend, at her father's house, the stepmother made a point of saying in front of her, she was so weak, maybe she needs someone with a bit more patience in those moments. My daughter looked at her with gratitude, as if she were the heroine of the story. I felt invisible. The woman who had spent sleepless nights at her side wasn't even acknowledged. It was injustice. Burning, suffocating injustice. Her manipulation didn't stop there. It was quiet, but constant. She highlighted her own qualities while undermining mine. The caregiver, the friend, the one who listens. Me. I was left as the nervous one, the busy one, the difficult one, and my daughter, without realizing it, became a captive of that narrative. I began to notice the effects in little gestures. She no longer shared her simple secrets with me as she once had. She seemed to save stories to tell the stepmother instead, and when I asked her something, sometimes she replied with ready-made lines, repeating them like an echo. "Sarah said, it's better this way. She thinks I should do it like this." It was as if my voice was being replaced by another. There were days I asked myself, am I losing? Am I fighting against something impossible? The exhaustion, the sadness, the weight of humiliation piled up. But then I would look at my daughter sleeping, her face peaceful on the pillow, and remember everything we had already shared. I remembered her first steps, the sleepless nights, the lullabies, and inside me, a flame would rise. I am her mother. I will never give up. Manipulation was her weapon, but my love would be my shield. I just didn't know that soon this silent war would no longer be just about words and comparisons. Very soon, she would manage to turn even my own daughter into an adversary without my little girl even realizing it. If there's a greater pain than hearing a stepmother's words trying to take my place, it's hearing my own daughter use those same words against me. That's when I realized the manipulation was no longer a quiet poison. It had become a current pulling our hands apart. The first time it happened was on an ordinary late afternoon. I had asked her to put the phone away and take a bath. Nothing out of the ordinary, just our usual routine. But suddenly she exploded. "You're so controlling. With Sarah, I can play as much as I want." The word controlling had already stung when I'd heard it from the stepmother. But hearing my daughter shouted at me felt like a knife in the heart. I tried to stay calm. I took a deep breath, crouched down to her level and said, "Sweetie, I just want to take care of you. Baths are part of staying healthy." But she turned her face away, sulking, and added, "She understands me better than you do. You only know how to boss me around." My vision blurred. It felt so unfair. I, who had spent sleepless nights tending fevers and always had a comforting word, was suddenly reduced to the bossy one. More fights followed, small at first, but growing increasingly painful. At lunch, Sarah cooks so much better. It's always the same here. Bedtime, she lets me stay up later. You're so boring. Getting dressed, with her I can pick my own clothes. You never let me. Each sentence landed like a judgment. I was boring, bossy, no fun. She, the stepmother, was fun, free, a friend. No matter how patiently I tried to respond, the weight of those words crushed me. One day, in the middle of a heated argument, I couldn't hold back. I was exhausted, fragile, full of open wounds. She accused me of not letting her live the way she wanted, repeating arguments that were clearly not her own. "You never understand me, Mom," she cried. I looked into her eyes and, my voice breaking, I said, "I understand you more than anyone in the world, sweetheart, because I am your mother, and nothing will ever change that." She was quiet for a few seconds. I saw her eyes fill, then she turned away and shut down. I locked myself in my room and cried softly. My whole body shook with rage and helplessness. The humiliation wasn't just in the words, it was what they proved. The manipulation was working. I was losing ground. I felt wronged and diminished, as if every sacrifice I'd made could be erased by a few poisonous phrases from outside. Worse, I began to turn my anger inward. Was I failing? Had I, without realizing it, given her reasons to believe the lies? It was a devastating anguish, but something inside me shouted, "No, it's not you, it's her. It's that woman who, hidden behind masks, is rewriting your daughter's story." By then, I understood the battle was no longer quiet. It was out in the open, in conversations, in looks, in tears. If I did nothing, my daughter would soon believe I truly was the villain. That night, before I slept, I made a quiet promise. I will fight, even if I'm alone, even if it's against everyone. I will fight for my daughter's love. Because no one, absolutely no one, will erase me from her life. It's a hard feeling to explain. It wasn't enough to endure the stepmother's barbs in front of my daughter, or to hear my little girl repeat words that weren't hers. Now I was beginning to notice the looks that spoke without words, looks that judged me as if I were guilty of everything. It was as though the manipulation was no longer confined to my home. It was spilling outward, contaminating the world around me. It started with small comments from relatives. A distant aunt, who rarely showed up, told me over lunch, "You know, I've heard you've been really nervous with Anne. You need to calm down, or the girl will grow up traumatized." I swallowed hard. Who said that? Who spread that version of me? I knew the answer. Then it was a neighbor, meeting me at the grocery store. "I saw your daughter the other day, and she mentioned how patient her stepmother is. It's so good when children have more than one female figure to support them, isn't it?" Patient, support. Words that, to me, sounded like condemnations, because behind them was the hidden message. "And you, mother, are not enough." Every glance I received seemed to carry doubt, disapproval, judgment. I asked myself, do they really believe I'm the villain of this story? Has the stepmother already managed to paint herself as the heroine to everyone? It felt like I was in an invisible courtroom, judged by people who didn't know the truth. And on the defendant's bench, I was utterly alone. Things got worse when the school began showing signs that something wasn't right. The teacher called me in and said, "Your daughter mentioned that sometimes she feels more understood at her dad's house. Don't worry, it could just be a phase." But I thought it was important to share. More understood at her dad's house. Those words echoed inside me like hammer blows. It wasn't just at home, not just among family. The stepmother's narrative was taking shape in my daughter's mouth, spreading outward into the world. I felt humiliated, wronged, betrayed. That night, in silence, I cried with rage. How could a stranger paint over my story as a mother with colors that weren't mine? How could I be judged by people who had never lived our nights, our days, our battles? It was pure revolt, but along with it, a crushing helplessness. How do you fight against invisible words? How do you counter distorted versions without sounding defensive, without reinforcing the very label they're trying to pin on you? That's when I realized the manipulation had two faces. One was against me, inside my home, corroding my bond with my daughter. The other was against the world, shaping a negative image of me so that, when I reacted, I'd look like nothing more than the bitter, jealous, incapable mother. And that was one of the greatest humiliations I'd ever endured, being judged not for my mistakes, but for lies skillfully spread. But in the midst of that invisible judgment, a spark was born inside me. If she could use manipulation as her weapon, then I would have to wield another, the truth. I had no masks, no disguises, but I had something no one could erase, the genuine love of a mother. And it was there, under the weight of so many condemning eyes, that I made another promise. They can believe whatever they want, but my daughter. One day, she will see who was always by her side. I never thought I'd live through something like that. I always believed a mother's deepest pains happen behind closed doors in silence, away from the world's eyes. But I was wrong. The stepmother didn't just want to hurt me privately. She wanted to expose me. She wanted to humiliate me where everyone could see it, especially my daughter. It happened at a family party hosted by my ex. I hesitated a long time before going, but my daughter, excited, had asked, "Mom, please come. I want you there." How could I say no? So I went. I put on my best smile, wore the outfit she'd picked out for me, and promised myself, no matter what happens, stay calm, do this for her. The start of the party seemed fine. Small talk, kids running in the yard, laughter that felt like background noise to me. I was tense, but focused on my daughter playing happily. Then the stepmother came over, carrying a plate of sweets. She smiled, that polished smile that no longer fooled me, and said loudly, so everyone could hear, "Anne mentioned she hardly eats fruit at your house. She loves them here, right, sweetheart?" My daughter nodded shyly, not grasping the weight of the comment. The relative's eyes turned straight to me, judging, critical. My face burned, my heart raced. I breathed deep and answered, "She eats fruit at home, too. I've always taken good care of her diet." But the stepmother didn't stop. In a saccharine tone, she added, "Oh, sure, I imagine. It's just that sometimes she says she's been eating a lot of processed food. Kids say the darndest things." Polite chuckles rippled around us. I wanted to disappear. My daughter, innocent and unaware of the damage, simply confirmed. "Yeah, Mom, I said that." My chest ached. The party went on, but the wound was open. Every time I tried to join a conversation, I felt eyes on me, sizing me up, comparing, judging. It was as if I were the outsider, the incapable one, and the stepmother, the perfect mom. That day I learned the power of public humiliation. She didn't want a quiet rivalry. She wanted to lower me in front of an audience, so her story would be validated by everyone's looks. I drove home with my daughter asleep in the back seat, and on that quiet road I cried harder than I ever had. It wasn't just sadness, it was outrage. How could a mother be judged by a party, by a poisonous comment, when her whole life had been devoted to real care? I realized the war was getting crueler. If I didn't respond, I risked losing not only my daughter's trust, but my own dignity. That night I promised myself, I will never allow her to expose me like that again. I will not accept public humiliation in silence. But to keep that promise, I would have to face not only the stepmother but also my ex's coldness. He seemed to take pleasure in seeing me diminished. And I didn't know yet, being humiliated in public would be just the beginning of a series of far crueler blows. After that party, I wasn't the same. The public humiliation ate away at me in a way I never imagined. It wasn't just the embarrassment of being exposed in front of everyone. It was the weight of my daughter's look, which however unintentionally seemed to confirm those lies. I came home and, for the first time since the divorce, felt truly defeated. The hours that followed were torment. I locked myself in the bedroom while my daughter slept in hers and cried until I had no more tears. I stared at my hands and asked myself, did I fail? Are they right? Am I, in some way, not good enough to be her mother? The injustice stopped being only external. For the first time, doubt began to plant itself inside me. It felt as if the stepmother's voice had crossed the walls and infiltrated my own mind. In the days that followed, that feeling only grew. Everything I did felt insufficient. If I cooked, the criticisms echoed. If I helped with homework, I feared I wasn't clear enough. If I scolded her, the echo came back. You're controlling, you're nervous, you don't know how to handle her. I started watching myself as if I were someone else, and my gestures, my words, my tone, asking whether I was really wrong, whether I was the one ruining everything. It was like living in an invisible prison, where where the executioner was doubt and the sentence was guilt. There was one night, in particular, when I felt on the edge of an abyss. My daughter had asked to sleep at her dad's in the middle of the week. That had never happened. I asked why, trying to sound calm, and she answered, "Because it's more fun there, Mom. I feel freer there." Those words cut me like knives. I waited until she fell asleep, then collapsed on the kitchen floor, lying on the cold tile, sobbing. I felt like the most failed woman in the world. It was humiliation, despair, loneliness. I felt surrounded by high walls, not knowing how to escape. For the first time, I had a real fear of losing my daughter, not by law, not by distance, but by the beating of her heart. It was in that ruined state that I realized something terrible. I wasn't only being attacked from the outside, the battle had moved inside me. The stepmother had achieved what she wanted. She'd planted doubt in the one place that had always been unshakable, my faith in myself as a mother. And if I didn't fight that, if I let doubt consume me, then yes, I risked disappearing from my daughter's life. In the early hours, between tears and whispered prayers, I found a spark of hope. I don't know where it came from, maybe unconditional love, maybe the unbearable pain that pushed me to react. I looked at the ceiling and whispered, "I will not give up. Even if I'm in ruins now, even if everything seems lost, I will rise, because she needs me, and because I am her mother." There, at the bottom of the well, I planted the seed of revolt that would soon sprout into a fight. Being in ruins didn't mean I was defeated. That's what I learned in that season of my life. Yes, I cried until I had no strength left. Yes, I doubted myself, but amid all those tears, a memory flashed like a beam of light. It was the first time my daughter wrapped her tiny hand around my finger in the hospital. The way she clung to me, as if to say without words, "I need you. I trust you." That memory hit me like a jolt. I understood that if I had been chosen to be her mother, it wasn't by accident. I couldn't let anyone, absolutely anyone, erase that bond. The next morning I woke up different. The pain was still there, of course, but something inside me had shifted. It was as if the ashes of humiliation had been replaced by a new flame. Revolt, not a destructive revolt, but one that reminded me who I was. I was her mother. I was the woman who had given everything for that child. I was the fortress that held up our home, even when it felt like it was falling apart. I decided I wouldn't live on my knees anymore under the stepmother's manipulation. If she had her weapons, comparisons, insinuations, the mask of perfection, I would have mine. The truth. And the truth was in my love. In the care no one could erase. In the fevered nights, the bedtime stories, the small hands held in silence. That was mine. That was ours. No matter how much they tried to twist things, that bond was real. I began to change small things. When my daughter repeated phrases that weren't really hers, instead of getting hurt, I started to ask calmly, "What do you think, sweetheart? Is that how you feel? Or did someone tell you to say that?" I wanted to help her learn to think for herself, to notice the difference between her own opinion and someone else's manipulation. At first she pushed back, irritable, evasive. But bit by bit I noticed her expression change. She hesitated before answering. She thought a little more. That gave me hope. I also stopped shrinking away from the stepmother. When she dropped her barbs, I answered firmly but calmly. I wouldn't be the woman who swallowed everything in silence anymore. In front of my daughter, I began to reaffirm my role, not with yelling or accusations, but with presence. If before I'd kept quiet to avoid conflict, now I made a point of showing up whole and unafraid. During that time, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I had. With every attempt to diminish me, I grew a little more on the inside. With every unfair comparison, I reminded myself of the value of my love. I still felt pain, of course, but alongside it came something new. Courage. Looking back, I see that this is where the real war began. Up until then, I'd been surviving, trying to hold on. From that moment on, I chose to fight. And that choice changed everything. Deciding to fight is one thing. Knowing how to fight is something else entirely. Inside me, I carried the spark of revolt, but I needed to turn it into action. I couldn't throw myself into blind battles, shouting out a pain only I could feel, because any outburst would be used against me. The stepmother was cunning. She won with the disguise of kindness, with subtle manipulation, with the false image of perfection. If I wanted to resist, I had to be more strategic than ever. That's how my resistance plan was born. The first part of the plan was simple, but it required discipline. Don't react with anger. How many times did I want to scream in front of my daughter, to tear that woman's mask off, but I understood that if I did, the stepmother would get exactly what she wanted, a scene where I looked unhinged, proving her narrative that I was nervous, unstable, inadequate. So I decided that my greatest act of resistance would be staying calm, not because I didn't feel rage I did, burning inside me, but because I realized a firm, steady silence could be more powerful than a scream. The second part of the plan was strengthening my bond with my daughter. I realized it wasn't enough to fight the lies. I had to nurture the love that had always existed between us. So I started putting even more value into our small moments. We kept diaries together, where we wrote secrets and dreams that were just ours. We created a bedtime story ritual, always ending by telling each other, "You are my best part." We came up with simple traditions like cooking together, or picking songs to sing in the car that became solid, lasting memories. These moments were like invisible walls I was building around our bond, because I knew, the stronger those memories became, the harder it would be for any manipulation to destroy them. The third part was not isolating myself. Manipulation had made me feel ashamed, as if the problem were me. But I realized that if I stayed silent, I'd only give more space for the stepmother's narrative to spread. So I decided to seek support. I opened up to a trusted friend who had known me closely for years. I vented, I cried, I told her everything. And she said a sentence that became my mantra: "You don't have to prove you're her mother. You just have to keep being one." Those words gave me breath. Over time, I also began to document everything, every poisonous comment, every humiliating moment, every strange phrase my daughter repeated. It wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. I needed evidence, records, a clear memory to keep from being swallowed by twisted versions of the truth. That notebook became my secret ally, a place where I could organize reality and not lose myself in the maze of lies. Step by step, I started to feel stronger. The pain was still there. The injustice still burned, but now I had a plan. I knew the war was just beginning. I knew I'd still face low blows, betrayals, humiliation. But for the first time, I felt I wasn't just reacting. I was acting. I was no longer just the wounded mother. I was the resistant mother. Resisting in silence takes a strength few people can understand. Every encounter with the stepmother was like standing in a battlefield with no visible weapons. There were no screams, no slaps, no soap opera scenes, but every word, every gesture, every look was an arrow shot straight at my heart. And inside, I fought a war. It was in the little things that the rivalry revealed itself. When I went to pick up my daughter from her father's house, the stepmother always made a point of showing up at the door, smiling as if she were handing me a gift, not a child. She would drop lines that seemed harmless, but were laced with poison. She was so happy with me this weekend. She didn't even want it to end. We had so much fun. She even said she wished she could live here forever. My daughter, innocent, smiled and nodded, unknowingly driving the blade deeper. And I, holding to my plan of resistance, only replied calmly, "I'm glad you had fun." But inside, revolt burned. Then there were the subtle gestures. She fixed my daughter's hair in front of me, as if she were the only one capable of caring for her. She held her hand tightly whenever I was around, like she was marking territory. She snapped countless photos and made sure to post them online with captions like, "My princess." My daughter smiled for the camera, not realizing those images were another weapon against me. While I quietly dedicated myself to her, the stepmother flaunted a staged version of motherhood that wasn't hers. And so, with every glance, every sugary phrase, the silent war deepened. I couldn't confront her directly, any explosion would be used against me. I couldn't ignore it either, every detail chipped away at my bond with my daughter. So I resisted. I resisted with steadiness, with love, with the truth that only I and my daughter carried deep in her heart. But the silent war didn't only happen at exchanges. It crept into my home too. My daughter, increasingly divided, started testing me. At her house, I get to choose everything. Here, I don't. She says I should talk more about my feelings. You should learn from her. Mom. Those phrases cut me to pieces. But instead of breaking down in front of her, I knelt, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Sweetheart, every home has its way. But nothing, absolutely nothing, changes how much I love you." That was my counterattack. Not with poison, but with love. Not with lies, but with presence. Over time, I noticed she'd fall silent after these responses. Sometimes she'd look away. Other times, she seemed to think, That gave me strength. It was like planting seeds to. If the stepmother sowed doubts, I sowed certainties. If she sowed comparisons, I sowed memories. And I knew, even if it took time, those seeds would bloom one day. But until that happened, I had to endure, and enduring was painful. It meant living every day under the weight of being watched, judged, compared. It meant swallowing tears, holding back screams, resisting without rest. The silent war was at every corner of my life, and I already felt that sooner or later, it would explode open, cruel, undeniable. There is no pain greater than watching your child torn between two worlds, two loves, two versions of the truth, and that's exactly what happened with my daughter. Little by little, I realized the war one was fighting against the stepmother was no longer only external. It was unfolding inside my little girl's heart. It began with silences. Before, when she came back from her dad's, she would talk nonstop, telling me stories, detailing every game, laughing out loud. Now there were long pauses. She seemed to measure what she could or couldn't share with me, as if afraid of hurting me. One day I asked, "Are you okay, sweetheart? You're so quiet." She sighed and said, "It's just, I don't know if I can talk about things from over there. If I tell you, it feels like you get sad. But if I don't, it feels like I don't like you." My heart broke. Another time, at bedtime, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Mom, I wish you two could be friends. That way, I wouldn't have to choose." Tears filled my eyes, because deep down, she already felt there was a choice to be made, and no child should ever carry that burden. But I knew the blame wasn't hers. It was on the one who, deliberately, put two women in competition and used the love of a child as the battleground. The doubts started showing up even in the simplest things. When I suggested an outing, she said, "But Sarah said that place is boring." When I set a rule, she questioned, "But at her house I don't have to." And when I corrected her, the harshest blow came. "You're too nervous." She wouldn't yell like that. Each phrase was a reflection of her inner conflict, as if she had two worlds inside her, each pulling in a different direction. And in the middle of this pain, I saw something even crueler. My daughter felt guilty. She believed she had to choose between loving me or loving her stepmother, as if there wasn't room for both. One night, her voice trembling, she said, "Mom, I don't want you to be mad at me, but I like her too." I held her so tight I thought I'd never let go. Tears rolled down my face as I whispered in her ear, "Sweetheart, you don't have to choose. I'm your mom, and I'll love you always, no matter what. A mother's love never changes," she cried with me. And in that moment, I understood the greatest challenge wasn't just fighting the stepmother. It was protecting my daughter from guilt, from division, from the manipulation that tried to turn her into a soldier in a war that was never hers. That's when I understood with absolute clarity, the battle wasn't only for my dignity anymore, it was for my daughter's soul. And I promised, once again, no matter the cost, I will protect her. I always knew my ex-husband wouldn't be an easy ally. Divorce left marks, resentments, wounds that never fully healed. Still, deep down I believed that, despite everything, he would put our daughter's well-being first. I was wrong. His betrayal didn't come with words of affection or gestures of love. It came in the most painful form. He chose to side with the stepmother. At first, it seemed like mere indifference. When I tried to talk about the changes in our daughter's behavior, he would cut me off. "You're overreacting. You're seeing problems where there aren't any." When I mentioned the stepmother's barbs, he'd laugh with thin irony. "You still haven't moved on, have you?" But over time his attitude shifted from indifference into direct attack. Once we had a parent-teacher meeting to discuss our daughter's performance. I voiced my concerns as calmly as I could. But he, in front of the teacher and coordinator, said firmly, "The problem is her mother. She's been really nervous. Sarah and I have been talking, and we think she does better with us." My whole body went cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't just discrediting me, he was giving the stepmother the authority to speak as if she were the mother. The teacher averted her eyes, embarrassed. I stayed silent, feeling a knot in my throat. Another moment came during a custody exchange. My daughter wanted to stay with me longer that weekend, but he answered coldly, "No, your mom needs to rest. Haven't you noticed how tired and stressed she's been?" The stepmother beside him only confirmed it with a satisfied smile. And there it was. It was no longer just her against me. Now there were two united in the same aim, to paint me as the fragile, nervous, incapable mother. I felt betrayed. Not as an ex-wife, the love between us had long since died, but as a mother. By siding with the stepmother, he was opening the door for her to replace me. And that, to me, was unforgivable. That night I cried in silence, careful not to wake our daughter. I felt anger, outrage, indignation, but above all, I felt fear. With his support, the stepmother now had more power, more legitimacy, and I, alone, felt increasingly vulnerable. For a few moments, I thought about giving up. I thought maybe it was impossible to fight two of them. But then I looked at my daughter, sleeping peacefully, and remembered the promise I'd made. I will never give up on you. And I realized, if it was two against me now, I would have to be twice as strong. Until then, the war had been fought with barbs, manipulations, and loaded glances. But now it moved to an official stage, the courtroom. From that moment on, it wasn't just my dignity at stake. It was my right to be with my daughter. It began with an envelope delivered to my home. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a cold, impersonal document, a petition for custody review. My heart pounded. The letters blurred before my eyes. Written there, in legal terms, was a declaration that I wasn't enough, that my daughter would be better off in the care of her father and the stepmother. I couldn't hold back the sobs. Tears smudged the words, but the message was unmistakable. They wanted to tear my daughter away from me. The following days were filled with anguish. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that I was being judged, not just as a mother, but as a person. I spent sleepless nights trying to grasp how anyone could question the love that had driven me since her birth. I hired an attorney, a firm, steady woman who looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you, but we'll need proof. We'll need to show your strength." And so the preparation began. Witnesses, documents, records. I remembered the notebook where I had written down every barb, every act of manipulation. Now it became my weapon. The day of the first hearing arrived. I sat before the judge, my hands clammy, my heart clenched. On one side, me; on the other, my ex-husband and the stepmother side by side, like a perfect couple ready to paint me as the villain. When it was his turn to speak, he used a carefully calm tone. "Your Honor, we believe the child's mother loves her, but she's been very unstable, nervous. We only want what's best for her." Then the stepmother added, with her sweet, practiced voice, "I care deeply for Anne. I've done everything I can to make sure she feels safe, healthy, and happy. I only want to help." Those words were daggers. She had no right to even be speaking there as if she were the mother. And yet, she wasn't. Everyone listened. When my turn came, my hands trembled, but my voice held firm. "I am not perfect, Your Honor, but I have dedicated every second of my life to my daughter. I know her in every detail. I know her fears, her dreams, because I am her mother. And no one can replace that bond." I looked at my daughter, who was present, and saw the confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand the complexity of what was happening. She only felt the weight of seeing two halves of her world at war. That look shattered me. The hearing ended, but the battle had only begun. There would be more sessions, more witnesses, more attempts to discredit me. I left the courtroom exhausted, but with one certainty: if they wanted to turn my love into a legal case, I would face it head-on, not for me, but for her, because I couldn't allow the justice system to be twisted into an instrument of injustice. That day I understood. My fight was no longer only against invisible manipulations. It was now official, written, stamped, recorded. I was in a war where every word could decide my future with my daughter. And even with fear gnawing at me, I made a silent vow as I stepped out of the courthouse. "You may try to discredit me before the world, but you will never erase what I am before my daughter, her mother." If the courtroom was a cold battlefield of papers, stamps, and legal arguments, my home had become a constant, silent war zone. Each day felt like a provisional sentence. Every look from my daughter was a verdict I feared to hear. Mornings grew especially heavy. When I woke and saw her getting ready for school, my heart filled with questions. Will she look at me with the same tenderness today? Will she repeat another planted line from the stepmother? Deep down, does she still see me as the mother who has always been by her side? It felt like living in suspension. Life didn't flow at Wade. The days she spent with her dad were even worse. I sat alone in the house, facing the silence, the tick of the clock like torture. Every minute apart from her seemed to confirm my worst fear, that she was being reprogrammed to forget me. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. The emptiness in the house was deafening. I saw her backpack in the corner, the pillow still indented from how she slept, and the tears would come without asking. Anguish was constant, a weight on my chest that kept me from breathing easy. And when she came home, when she came home, it felt like I could breathe again. But with the relief came fear. Every return brought new things, comparisons, comments that weren't hers. At Sarah's house, I don't have to ask for anything. She understands me before I say it. She said, "You should relax more, Mom. You should be more like her." Each sentence was a knife. I smiled, hid it, answered with patience, but inside, each word tore me apart. Around that time, my body began to feel the cost of the war. I couldn't sleep through the night. I woke with my heart racing. I had constant stomach aches, as if the anxiety had turned to acid. And yet, when the sun rose, I got up, smiled for my daughter, and did everything I could so she wouldn't feel the storm tearing me apart inside. The cruelest thing was the doubt, not hers, but mine. Because even knowing I was fighting with everything I had, there were moments when a voice whispered, "What if I lose? What if none of this is enough?" That voice haunted me, made me feel small, powerless, but that same pain pushed me forward. If there was any chance of losing her, I had to fight twice as hard to hold on. So day after day I lived my days of anguish, a time when every second felt like an eternity, when each hug from my daughter was both consolation and a reminder of what I could lose. But it was in that despair that I also found one certainty. If the court's justice was blind, I would have to make my daughter see the truth with her own eyes. The time had come when silence no longer served me. I had resisted quietly, swallowed the barbs, hidden my tears, but I realized that if I stayed silent, the stepmother wouldn't just gain ground, she would take my voice, and without my voice, I would disappear from my daughter's life. It was time to speak. The first step started at home. One night my daughter came back full of rehearsed lines, as if someone had fed her a script. "Sarah says you're really nervous, that sometimes it's better if I stay there because you get stressed here." I took a deep breath. The old me would have cried or kept quiet. But this time I sat down with her, looked into her eyes, and said, "Sweetheart, I'm not going to let anyone tell you who I am. Only you know me because you lived every hug, every bedtime story, every night I stayed up caring for you. I might make mistakes, but they'll always be because I'm trying to do right by you. Because I am your mother." She fell silent. Her eyes filled, and I felt a crack form in the wall of lies. The second step was in front of others. I couldn't keep letting relatives, neighbors, and even teachers accept only the version the stepmother had manufactured. At a parent meeting, when someone once again hinted that my daughter seemed more balanced at her dad's house, I breathed in and spoke up, steady but not hostile. I asked for respect for my history with my daughter. No one here stayed by her side through midnight fevers, through the fears she faced, through the nights she needed to be held. I was the one there. So I will not let anyone rewrite who I am to her. I am her mother. There is no substitute for that. The room quieted. I knew not everyone would believe me, but for the first time I felt my voice cut through the invisible judgment. The third step was in court. At the next hearing, when the stepmother once again tried to cast herself as the savior, I didn't wait for my lawyer to speak. I asked for the floor and told the judge, "Your Honor, with all due respect, this woman is not my daughter's mother. She may be present, she may help sometimes, but being a mother is far more than occasional presence. It's being there from the first cry, carrying the child, sacrificing yourself. That is irreplaceable. I will not allow what I earned with love and sacrifice to be taken from me." My voice shook, but it was firm. I wasn't speaking just to the judge, I was speaking for my daughter, who was there listening. And in that moment I saw something shift in her eyes. It wasn't the end of the conflict, but it was the start of a new awareness, that I would no longer be silent. That decision cost me. I knew every word could be twisted against me, that the stepmother would try to paint my firmness as hysteria. But it didn't matter anymore. Silence was killing me faster than any courtroom. My voice needed to be heard. From that moment on, it would be. I thought I had already felt the worst, the public humiliation, my ex's betrayal, my daughter's words like knives. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the blow they plotted next. A cold, calculated strike, designed to destroy me before the law, and, more cruelly, before my daughter's heart. It started on a custody weekend. My daughter and I had spent Saturday together. We baked a cake, watched an old movie she loved, and painted our nails. It was a peaceful day full of laughter. On Sunday she went back to her dad's. On Monday morning, my world collapsed. I received a call from the school. The principal, in a serious tone, asked me to come in. My heart raced. When I arrived, my ex and the stepmother were already seated in the office, wearing carefully concerned expressions. The principal was blunt. "Your daughter said that at home you yell at her a lot and that sometimes she feels afraid." I felt my body go cold. My daughter, saying that. I looked at her there, shrinking, unable to meet my eyes. In her face I saw the conflict. It wasn't true, but it was what she'd been led to believe. In that instant, everything clicked. That was the plan. Plant phrases, twist memories, distort moments until my daughter, confused, repeated them as truth. And when she did, anyone would believe her. After all, kids don't lie. But I knew it wasn't her lie. It was a lie made for her. The worst came next. Days later, I received a notice. A formal complaint had been filed against me, alleging emotional instability and aggressive behavior. There was no evidence, only distorted words, and of course, the stepmother's voice presenting herself as a witness to the mother's fragility. It was the perfect trap. If I reacted with anger, I'd confirm what they claimed. If I stayed quiet, I'd look guilty. I was cornered. I remember every detail of the hearing. The stepmother spoke with rehearsed calm. "I never wanted to take anyone's place, but I can't stand by and see Anne suffer. She's told me several times she's afraid when her mother loses control." Pressed, my daughter only bowed her head. Her silence was the most painful stab I've ever felt. I wanted to scream, to stand up and ask. What about the nights she slept in my arms, the times I comforted her while she cried, the smiles that were only ours? But I breathed deeply. I looked at the judge, at my daughter, and said, "I am not perfect. No one is. But I have never, ever yelled at my daughter in a way that would make her afraid. What she is repeating is not hers. It's the product of words put in her mouth. I know because I know her every look and gesture. I know when something doesn't come from her heart." I left that hearing exhausted, shattered. I felt like I had lost another battle. But inside me, a conviction hardened. If they were capable of weaponizing my daughter's innocence, then I would have to be even stronger. Because if I fell, it wouldn't be only me who lost. It would be her. There are pains that don't fit into words. Pains that suffocate, that paralyze, that make you believe there's no ground left beneath your feet. That's how I felt after that hearing. For the first time, truly, I believed I was about to lose my daughter. In the days that followed, nothing felt real. I walked through the house, and every corner reminded me of her. The pillow still scented with baby shampoo, the pink cup left on the counter, the drawings stuck to the fridge. Everything whispered, "What if she never comes back?" That question echoed relentlessly in my head. I tried to push it away, but it returned, merciless. The fear of losing my daughter, not just to the court, but to the manipulation, was greater than any physical pain I'd ever known. Then came the first signs that the fear wasn't my imagination. My daughter began to refuse invitations to things that used to be our favorites. "Mom, I don't think I want to go to the movies tonight. We already saw that at Daddy's, Mom. I don't want to sleep over here tonight. Daddy's place is more fun." Each refusal felt like another step away. I watched her slipping through my fingers, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, she drifted a little farther each day. The cruelest moment was when she looked me square in the eyes and said, "Mom, sometimes I think I like her more than you." The world collapsed. My whole body shook. For a second I thought I might faint. I swallowed the sob and answered with the steadiest voice I could find. "You can like her. That's okay. But never forget, I am your mother. My love for you is bigger than anything in the world." She fell silent, maybe not fully grasping the weight of what she'd said. But I felt like I'd lost a battle that should never have been fought. That night, lying alone, I seriously thought about giving up, letting her stay longer at her dad's, stopping the fight against a wall that felt impossible to climb. Maybe, I wondered, what's best for her is to be where she feels freer. But in the middle of that despair, I remembered a truth no one could erase. I am her mother. No manipulation, no court ruling, no judging glance could change that. Even though in that moment I felt almost lost, I knew something inside me remained unbreakable, the strength of a mother who loves. And there I decided, if I must fight to the end, I will. Even if the world says otherwise, even if I doubt myself, I will resist. Losing my daughter was not an option. We all have a night that marks us forever. Mine came during that time when the fight with the stepmother and my ex felt pointless, when I looked at myself and thought, maybe it's better to give up. It was a cold, early morning. The house was silent except for the living room clock. I sat on the kitchen floor, hugging my knees, unable to sleep. My daughter was at her dad's that weekend. And I was alone with my darkest thoughts. Her words echoed in my mind. Sometimes I think I like her more than you. That sentence shredded me. Each replay felt like a hammer breaking the pieces of me that were left. I cried like never before. This wasn't a cry of indignation anymore. It was a cry of defeat. A cry from someone who believed she had no strength left to go on. For the first time, I seriously considered giving up custody, letting her stay at her father's, with the stepmother, where she seemed so happy, and living off memories myself. The idea haunted me, but in that moment it felt almost like relief. No more fights, no more draining battles, no more daily judgment, just release and the acceptance of emptiness. Then, in the middle of that darkness, something happened. I found a box of old memories in the closet. Inside were yellowed photos, notes my daughter had written when she was learning to write, crooked drawings with phrases like, "I love you, Mommy." I held one of those papers to my chest and broke down again. But this time my tears weren't only for pain, they were for memory, for love, for certainty. Because there it was, the proof of everything. Proof that our bond wasn't made up, wasn't fragile, couldn't be erased. It was written in every scribble, in every frozen smile in the photos. It was on that darkest night that I realized I might lose battles, be humiliated, be accused unfairly, but never, never would I lose the right to be her mother. The love we shared was stronger than any manipulation. When the sun rose, my eyes were puffy, my soul still in pieces, but something new lived inside me. A small flame, almost invisible, but real. The darkness had not won. If I had survived that night, I could survive anything. After the darkest night, I thought I was condemned to walk in the dark forever. But life, as it often does, surprised me. Just when I felt most fragile, an unexpected ray of light pierced my shadow. And that light came from where I least expected it. My daughter. It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon. I was making lunch, my heart still heavy, when she came into the kitchen holding a drawing. "Mom, look what I made." I took the paper and could barely hold back the tears. It was a simple, childlike drawing, but full of meaning. The two of us holding hands and smiling. And above, in crooked letters, it read, "I love my mom." I looked at her, speechless. Then she added in a small, almost shy voice, "It's just, sometimes I say things that aren't mine, Mom, but I don't want you to forget that I love you." My chest exploded with relief. It felt like every chain that had held me in place snapped in that instant. In that moment, I realized that despite all the manipulation, despite the doubts and comparisons, there was a seed inside her that only I had planted. Our true love. She might get confused, she might repeat words that weren't hers, but deep down she knew who I was. That certainty rekindled something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That small gesture changed everything. Instead of wasting all my energy trying to argue with the stepmother, I would focus on strengthening our bond. We started small, secret rituals just for us. Every night before bed, we wrote one word of gratitude in a little notebook. We invented a code hug, a special embrace that meant, "I'm with you no matter what." Whenever we went out, we took a photo together and I'd say, "This is our story, sweetheart, just ours." Those gestures were like bricks in an invisible wall, protecting us from the storm. Of course, the stepmother's attacks continued, the barbs, the comparisons, the attempts to erase me. But now I had a new strength, because I knew that, beneath it all, my daughter still recognized me. She still loved me. And I learned that day that a single ray of light is enough to break the densest darkness. My daughter's drawing stayed pinned to the fridge. I looked at it every day like a beacon in the storm. Those crooked letters, "I love my mom," were proof that no matter how hard they pushed, there was a space inside her that belonged only to me. That's where I began to rebuild. At first it was slow. I still carried the scars of humiliation, manipulation, and sleepless nights. But I decided that, instead of living defensive, I needed to grow stronger, not just for me, but for her. I started by taking care of myself. Simple things I'd forgotten. Walks in the park, music that made me smile, a cup of coffee watching the sunrise. Little by little I remembered I was more than the pain, more than the fight. And the more I found myself again, the more strength I had to fight for my daughter. I also sought professional help. For the first time, I sat with a therapist and poured everything out: the stepmother's barbs, my ex's betrayal, the words my daughter used that cut me open. I talked and cried and raged. The therapist listened and said calmly, "You can't control what they say, but you can control what you build with your daughter. Your relationship is unique. Invest in it, strengthen it, and no poison can destroy it." Those words gave me direction. I began to watch more and react less. When my daughter brought up a comparison, instead of getting hurt, I used it to show my love. She said, "You're boring." "Maybe I am sometimes, sweetheart, but do you know why? Because I want what's best for you, and I'll be here even when you don't like my rules." I'd see her think, and every hug after those talks felt like planting something that would take root. I changed in court too. I stopped presenting myself as the fragile mother and showed up as the steady one, unafraid to speak the truth. My lawyer even said, "You're different, stronger, that will matter." And it did, because, while the stepmother leaned on rehearsed lines, I spoke from the heart. Truth carries a weight lies can't hold for long. Little by little, I realized I wasn't just resisting. I was rebuilding not only my image before the world, but my own confidence. I, who had doubted myself, remembered who I am: a real mother, imperfect but unwavering in love. And that certainty gave me courage, the courage to face every hearing, every judging look, every manipulation, the courage to lift my head and say, "I will not be erased." Never. I'd always heard the saying, "Lies don't last long." For a long time, I thought my case was different, that the stepmothers and my ex's deceptions would always dominate, while I fought alone to keep the truth alive. But, as life always proves, no mask lasts forever. And slowly, the truth began to surface. It started with small slips. My daughter, in casual conversations, let things slip that helped me connect the dots. "Mom, Sarah got mad because I told her." She yelled at me. "She said I shouldn't repeat certain things to you because you don't understand." Those words lit a fire inside me. If before she had been painted as perfect, now cracks were showing in that painting. And my daughter was beginning to see them. Another sign came from the school itself. One day, I was called in for a meeting. I braced for more criticism, more accusations. But to my surprise, the teacher confided, "Your daughter said she feels pressured at her dad's house. She said she's afraid of disappointing her stepmother." A chill ran down my spine. There it was. The castle of kindness she had built was showing fractures. Because, in the end, no one can keep up a lie forever without letting some truth slip out. The confirmation came on an ordinary day when a neighbor pulled me aside. With a hesitant look, she said, "Look, it's none of my business, but I've heard arguments coming from your ex's house. The stepmother yells loudly. I thought you should know." In that moment, I felt both fury and relief. Fury, because my daughter truly was being subjected to shouting and pressure. Relief, because I finally had witnesses to what I'd always known. I began gathering these signs: every phrase, every report, every detail, all documented, all saved. The truth was finally stepping out of the shadows. Even my ex began to show cracks. In a hearing, he tried to insist our daughter only felt good at his house. But when questioned about her school performance and doctor visits, he couldn't explain why it was always me who showed up. The masks were slipping. For the first time in a long time, I felt justice on my side, not just the court's justice, but life's justice, which reveals who we really are when no one can hold up the facade anymore. The stepmother still smiled, still clung to her perfect image, but I could already see the fear in her eyes. She knew the truth was coming, and once it arrived in full, nothing could stop it. For so long I had breathed fear, anguish, and humiliation that when I felt the first breath of justice, it was like my lungs finally worked again after years of suffocation. It wasn't the final victory, but it was enough to show me the truth was finally finding its way through. That breath came during a decisive hearing. The judge, tired of so many contradictory stories, requested detailed reports from the school about my daughter's behavior. When the document was read aloud, my heart pounded. The teacher's words were clear. The mother is the one who attends every meeting, keeps up with schoolwork, and shows daily commitment to the child's education. The child reported feeling pressured at her father's home when she doesn't meet the stepmother's expectations. Just 2 sentences, but every word hammered against the narrative built to discredit me. I glanced at the stepmother. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. Another breath of justice came from the most unexpected place, my daughter's own voice. During the hearing, the judge gently asked her, "Where do you feel safest?" There was a heavy silence. I barely breathed. Then, in a low, almost whispered voice, she answered, "With my mom." Those words were the sweetest relief I've ever known. I knew she was still conflicted, still tangled in confusion, but in that moment, before the court, she had spoken the truth of her heart. When I left the courtroom that day, the wind on my face felt different, like the universe itself was saying, "Keep going, you're not fighting in vain." Of course, I knew the war was far from over. But after so many defeats, that small breath felt like a flag rising in the middle of the battlefield, a sign the outcome could be different. That night, I hugged my daughter tightly before bed and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me. No matter what happens, I will always fight for you." She looked at me with innocent eyes and said, "I know, Mom, that's why I'm not scared when I'm with you." And in that moment I understood. The truest breath of justice wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in my daughter's soul, which, despite everything, still knew where her safe harbor was. I knew this moment would come. After so many disguised barbs, hidden manipulations, and poison quietly spread, it was time for an open confrontation. No masks, no half-words, face to face. It happened at a special hearing the judge called, wanting everyone in the room together. Me, my ex, the stepmother, our lawyers, and a mediator. The tension in the air was suffocating. I sat with my heart racing but determined not to be silenced. Then, the stepmother, with her sweet, calculated voice, dropped the line that would set everything on fire. "I only want what's best for Anne, but let's be honest, right? She's said many times she's happier with me than with her mother. Isn't that true, Anne?" My daughter froze, frightened, unsure how to answer. I felt my blood boil. "You're manipulating my daughter in front of everyone," I said, my voice trembling with outrage. "Manipulating." She shot back with an ironic smile. "Sweetheart, it's not manipulation when the child asks for it herself. You should be grateful I'm filling the gaps you left." It hit me like a punch. The room fell silent. Even the judge raised his eyebrows. I shook with rage. "Gaps?" I asked, holding back the tears. "You have no idea of the sacrifices I made, the sleepless nights, the pain I carried so she could have everything. And you dare say I left gaps?" The stepmother leaned in as if to push the knife further. "The problem is that love without stability isn't enough. She needs a real mother, and maybe I have to be that mother." That line landed like a bomb. Maybe I have to be that mother. There, it was the heart of the plan from the start. Not to help, not to support, but to replace me. My daughter's eyes widened and she looked at me. I saw the pain on her face at hearing that. I saw the confusion, the fear of losing me. And in that instant, with everything I had left inside me, I answered, "You can try to take my place. You can fool a lot of people with your masks, but you will never be what I am." Being a mother isn't a title, it isn't a performance, it isn't an appearance. A mother is the one who gives life, who bleeds, who cries, who fights, and that, you will never be. The room was stunned. The judge called for calm. The lawyers stirred. But inside me, despite the tears, there was a burning flame. I had finally spoken aloud what I'd swallowed for so long, and by the look on my daughter's face, I knew she had heard me too. After the confrontation, something shifted in the air. Until then, the stepmother had managed to sustain the image of the perfect woman, the savior, the exemplary caregiver. But when she let slip those words, "Maybe I have to be that mother," the mask began to crack in front of everyone. And once the first crack appears, there's no way to hide the fissures. In the days that followed, the impact of that confrontation reverberated. The judge requested additional reports, and this time sweet talk wasn't enough. He wanted facts. That's when reality began to assert itself. The school's report showed that, contrary to their claims, my daughter's anxiety increased precisely after weekends at her father's house. A school psychologist added, "The child shows signs of being pressured to please everyone, especially the stepmother. This generates fear and insecurity." It was like hearing in clinical terms what I had always known in my heart. On top of that, neighbors who had once kept quiet began to speak up. In statements, they described frequent arguments coming from my ex's house. The stepmother's yelling, even moments when my daughter cried alone in the yard. Voices that had once been silenced now echoed as undeniable truths. And the stepmother herself, without realizing it, began betraying her own arrogance. The more she tried to defend herself, the more it slipped out. I only want what's best for the child. I know how to handle her better than her own mother. It's not my fault if she sees me as her role model. Each phrase, spoken publicly, tore apart the humble image she had so carefully crafted. The people in the room, family members, even court staff began to see the pride hiding behind her smile. The peak came when my daughter, called once more to speak, said with a trembling voice, "I like her, but sometimes I feel like I have to choose between her and my mom. And I don't want to choose." The judge exhaled deeply and noted something in silence. The stepmother, upon hearing that, lost her composure and blurted out, almost without thinking, "If she really had to choose, I have no doubt she'd pick me." The room fell into shock. What had once been disguised as support now stood bare. It was a cruel contest. In that moment I realized the masks had fallen. She was no longer the perfect stepmother. She was simply a woman, exposed in her ambition to take a place that never belonged to her. And I, despite all the pain, felt that justice, both human and divine, was finally beginning to see. The courtroom was packed that morning. The air felt heavier than ever, as if every breath was a reminder of the weight of the moment. This was the final judgment, the day that would decide whether I remained a constant presence in my daughter's life, or whether I'd be reduced to an empty space, stolen by manipulation and injustice. I sat with sweaty hands while my attorney arranged the papers in front of us. Across the room sat my ex-husband, his face cold and distant, and the stepmother still trying to hold on to her sweet smile, though her eyes betrayed nerves. The judge entered. Everyone stood. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the sound echoed through the hall. Then came the statements. My ex clung to his well-rehearsed narrative. The mother is unstable, stressed, overwhelmed. I don't question her love, but I believe the child has been thriving better in our home. Then, the stepmother took the floor, cloaking her arrogance once again in sugary tones. "Your Honor, I don't want to replace anyone, but the truth is that the child turns to me for things her mother can't provide. She's even said herself she feels more comfortable with me. I only want her to have the chance to grow up in the healthiest environment possible." It was the perfect speech to try to turn the room against me, but it no longer carried the same weight. Her masks had already cracked, and people were beginning to see her for what she was. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and let my heart speak. "Your Honor, I could bring reports, witnesses, and proof, and I have. But nothing weighs more than the truth of the bond between a mother and her child. I've never claimed perfection for myself. I make mistakes, like any human being. But I have never failed in love, in dedication, in presence, and that cannot be replaced. I will not allow my love to be turned into a court case. I will not allow my daughter to be used as a trophy in a dispute. She is not an object. She is part of me." My voice trembled not with fear, but with strength. The judge was silent for several seconds. He flipped through the reports again, reread his notes. Finally, he spoke. "After reviewing the evidence, testimonies, and the child's well-being, the court decides that custody will remain primarily with the mother, maintaining visitation with the father, but without expanding the stepmother's role." I couldn't hold back the tears. My body collapsed with relief. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was confirmation that all my struggle, my suffering, my resistance had not been in vain. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at me with tears in her eyes, and on her face I saw something I will never forget. Relief. The stepmother, for the first time, lost her smile. In her eyes I saw raw anger, barely contained behind her cracked mask. My ex simply bowed his head, and I held my daughter's hand and gave silent thanks. The court's decision restored my right to be by my daughter's side, but I knew the real battle wasn't on paper or in the judge's stamps. The true war was still being fought inside her heart. For months, manipulation had planted doubts, created distance, and forced choices no child should ever have to carry. I had won in court, but now I had to win where it really mattered, fully regaining my daughter's trust and love. At first, it was delicate. She was still confused, afraid of hurting me, torn between feelings. Sometimes she'd let slip little comments. "Sarah says she misses me. It's different over there, Mom." Sometimes I miss it too. I no longer reacted with pain. I had learned to listen without exploding. My only answer was, "It's okay to feel that way, sweetheart. But I want you to know this will always be your home." With each calm response, I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. I began creating moments just for us, not to compete, but to rebuild. We went back to cooking together, but this time I let her invent her own silly recipes. We revived our bedtime stories, but now she also created alternate endings. Little by little, she loosened up, laughed again, spoke without fear. One day, while we were walking in the park, she turned to me and said, "Mom, I like you just the way you are, even when you get mad." Those words made me cry right there in the middle of the path, tears of joy, because they were proof she was learning to separate the truth from the manipulation. Winning her back wasn't about grand gestures, it was about consistency. I was there for every homework assignment, every hug before school, every sleepless night, and little by little, my daughter began to see. While others tried to compete for her love, I simply stayed. And that's what makes the difference. The most powerful moment of all came on a rainy night. I was tired, making dinner, when she wrapped her arms around me from behind and whispered, "Mom, I never want you to think you could lose me again, because I'll never leave you." I broke down in tears. I hugged her tight, and in that moment, I felt the chains that had once kept us apart finally shatter. The court gave me the legal victory, but my daughter, she gave me the victory of the heart. And that the heart was the only victory that truly mattered. Getting here was like crossing an endless desert. There were days when the thirst for justice nearly suffocated me. Nights when the darkness threatened to swallow me whole. Moments when the thought of giving up whispered far too loudly in my ear. But looking back, I realized that every tear, every wound, every partial defeat prepared me for the victory that truly matters. I'm not just talking about the victory in court. That mattered. Of course, it gave me back the right to be present, to legally protect my daughter. But the greater victory was something else. Never allowing anyone to erase the love that binds us. Today, when I see my daughter, now an adult, with a good job, telling her stories without fear, I feel within me a peace that once seemed impossible. She no longer carries the burden of choosing sides. She has learned that she can love freely, without guilt, because a mother's love is infinite and unconditional. And I've learned something even deeper, that being a mother isn't about being perfect, it's about remaining. Remaining when others try to silence us. Remaining when we're called nervous, fragile, or inadequate. Remaining when they try to tear us from the hearts of the ones we love most. The stepmother tried to erase me, but she discovered a truth no one can deny. A mother's love cannot be erased, replaced, or stolen. It endures. And my ex, by siding with her, unknowingly taught me to be even stronger. Because when we are left standing alone, that is when we discover the strength that has always lived inside us. If I share my story today, it's not to relive the pain, but to leave a message for every mother who has ever felt humiliated, judged, or diminished. You are enough. You are irreplaceable. You are the fortress your children need. Even when the world tries to convince you otherwise, don't let them silence your voice. Don't let them steal your place. Because the bond between a mother and her child is written in something no court, no manipulation, no person can ever break. I look at my daughter now and think, it was worth it. Every fight, every tear, every sleepless night. Because in the end, what remained wasn't the pain, it was the certainty that we won together. And today, I can finally say, with peace in my heart, they tried to erase me from my daughter's life. But love was stronger. Mothers, women, grandmothers, you know what it's like to hold a family together. Tell me, what would you do if someone tried to take your place? Share your thoughts in the comments.